Hello and welcome back to another episode of Generation Films. My name is American Ben. As many of you know, Mandalorians were a people who hailed from the planet Mandalore, where arose a warrior culture that produced some of the galaxy's most legendary mercenaries and bounty hunters. You know, you think about the advanced ships the Mandalorians create and their super strong iron called Beskar, and you realize Mandalore is basically a sociopathic Wakanda. They're a secluded warrior culture rife with advanced technology, and instead of using such technology for the good of the world or galaxy in this case, they use it for conquest and genocide. Yep, they've killed a lot of people. They've killed a lot of everything, actually. Today we are starting a series discussing their ships. In this series we are going to cover every ship they either use or produce. The truth is we have to include the ones they produce because we don't really know all of the ships they use, as they've never gotten enough of a spotlight, and so some ships on this list they might be known for producing but not using, and yet they might actually use them. The first ship we are going to look at is the Crusader class corvette, a Mandalorian produced ship that's actually not made by Mandal Motors but Mandal Hypernautics, a ship and tank manufacturing organization on Mandalore. The Crusader, named for the Mandalorian Crusaders, an ancient group of sword-wielding Mandalorians, was designed to combat starfighters and bombers, and as such, it was as heavily armed as it could be while still being somewhat fast and agile. These characteristics made the Crusader class one of the more expensive Mandalorian ships for its size. The ship possessed an advanced point-defensed weapon system that consisted of an array of cannons that were capable of shooting down enemy ships, as well as enemy missiles and torpedoes. Mandal Hypernautics introduced the ship in the years following the Clone Wars, and they sold two to the Galactic Empire as a test run. When ultimately the Empire decided not to purchase any more after the test run, Mandal Hypernautics began to sell the ship more widely, including to the Mandalorians themselves. The Firespray 31 class patrol and attack craft, which coincidentally was the nickname for my ex-girlfriend when she was angry at me, was a patrol ship made by Quat Systems Engineering. A custom version of the ship, named Slave 1, was used by wannabe Mandalorians Jango and Boba Fett during their journeys. The Firespray was often used by Mandalorians to guard important points of interest. The ship contained holding cells within it for the purpose of jailing and transporting all sorts of creatures. Oh, and of course, while boasting good speed and maneuverability, the ship was also armed with 2 laser cannons, a pair of warhead launchers each equipped with 5 concussion missiles, and a tractor beam projector. The reason I chose to include this smaller patrol ship among the warships is twofold. One, the ship often did find itself in space combat as it was used to intercept smugglers and other ships engaged in illicit activity, and 2, I don't have anywhere else to put it, and this video was short enough that I could fit it in. The Accuyor type assault ship, the pronunciation of which I just butchered like it was a Tusken Raider and I was a terrible actor cast in a poorly written movie, was a ship flown by the Neo Crusaders, a group that arose from the original Crusaders that would go on to conquer systems across the galaxy before being stopped by the Jedi. Armed with medium double turbo lasers, heavy ion cannons, and super heavy concussion missile launchers, the ship always had its guns charged and ready to fire, including when traveling in hyperspace, so that if needed it could engage enemies immediately after arriving at a destination. The Accuyor, its name coming from the Mandalorian word for ambush, could deploy soldiers quickly as well, as it had no landing bay and instead had airlocks that projected troops towards other ships for boarding operations. The Kandosi type dreadnought, a name derived from the Mandalorian word for ruthless, which itself means lacking a female Supreme Court judge, was a large capital ship used by the Mandalorians, notably during the Mandalorian Wars. The ship was armed with 5 medium double turbo laser batteries, 2 point defense triple laser cannon batteries, 2 super heavy concussion missile batteries, and 2 tractor beam batteries. Coming in at almost 4,500 feet long, the Kandosi dreadnought would house 128 Devab type starfighters, 8 Shadler type troop ships, some Basilisk war droids, various other support craft, 30,000 troops, 10,000 crew, 45,000 tons of cargo, and 5 years worth of consumables, or 2 weeks worth if Hutts were aboard. The ship was actually originally designed and built by the Fenelar, an ancient sentient species from the planet Fennel, but the Mandalorians stole the ships and designs and later would manufacture them themselves. The Fenelar didn't complain though, mostly because the Mandalorians exterminated them. As an integral part of the Mandalorian fleet during the Mandalorian Wars, the Mandalorians would often use this ship for planetary bombardment. Next up we have the Keldabi class battleship, named after the capital city of Mandalore. The Keldabi class was a battleship designed by Mandal Hypernautics and manufactured by both Mandal Hypernautics and Mandal Motors. Coming in at just under 3,300 feet, the ship was significantly smaller than the Kandosi type dreadnought, but could still carry a complement of 36 starfighters, a couple small shuttles and light freighters, 6,000 crew, 1,000 passengers, and 20,000 tons of cargo. The Keldabi class was also armed with 25 heavy turbo lasers, 15 heavy ion cannons, 2 mass driver missile launcher batteries with 10 missiles each, 5 heavy tractor beams, and a shield leecher weapon weapon which could leech energy from enemy shields to power its own weapon and shield systems. The Kaldabi class was powerful enough to compete with an Imperial-class Star Destroyer despite being much smaller. Mandalorians used this ship during the Galactic Civil War, and additionally the Zan Consortium were able to manufacture and use it after extorting the plans for the ship from Mandal Hypernautics. The Pyramid-type battleship, the name derived from the Mandalorian word for killer or assassin, was a battleship used by the Mandalorian Crusaders and later the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders during the Mandalorian Wars, where the ship was often seen being supported by the Jehavir-type assault ships. The Pyramid-type battleship resembled the Basilisk war droids in appearance, and that's because the ship was originally designed and manufactured by the Basiliskans, an intelligent lizard species native to the planet Basilisk. The Mandalorians stole this design as well and eventually updated the Pyramid to have a less organic makeup. Don't worry though, the Mandalorians did not exterminate the Basiliskans after conquering them. Nope, instead they enslaved and mounted them and used them as their personal war dragons. The Basiliskans might have been a highly intelligent and dignified species, but I kind of feel like the unofficial rule is, if you're not bipedal, you're pretty much rideable. Anyway, back to the ship. Just as the Mandalorians often used the Basiliskans for ground assaults, so too did they often use the Pyramid for ground-level attacks. The Mandalorian cruiser is not a ship we know much about, as it's only briefly mentioned throughout Star Wars history books. We do know that it was a warship that was used by the Mandalorians during the Great Galactic War, a galaxy-wide war between the Sith Empire and Galactic Republic that took place in the mid-3600s BBY, a few hundred years after the Mandalorian Wars. The Mandalorians famously used this ship as part of the blockade of the Hydian Way, which took place near the end of the conflict and resulted in a major supply and economic crisis for the Galactic Republic. Again, we can't be sure about most of the details concerning this ship, but most Star Wars historians seem to think the ship was outfitted with an assortment of turbo-laser batteries among a plethora of other weapons. I've also seen an estimate putting the ship at about 4,000 feet long, but I'm not sure there's any veracity to that claim. The Mandalorian warship was a battleship used by the Neo-Crusaders during the Mandalorian Wars. The design of this ship might be familiar to you, as it was dagger-shaped just like the latter Star Wars destroyers, and indeed many people believe that the Mandalorian warship was the first ship to have this design, and it was most certainly the basis for at least the Venator-class Star Destroyer that would come thousands of years later. The ship was armed with 14 dual turbo-laser turrets and an anti-capital ship missile launcher. The Terek-type gunship, from the Mandalorian word for pitiless, was a 59-foot-long fast-attack gunship, also used by the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders during the Mandalorian Wars. Armed with double laser cannons, large groups of Terek-type gunships would break through enemy lines and use their speed to quickly surround capital ships. The ship was most notably used during the Battle of Cathar, a battle during the Mandalorian Wars between the Neo-Crusaders and the Cathar, a humanoid feline species. Good news here, despite a decisive victory, the Mandalorians did not wipe out the Cathar. Let the record show at least a handful were left alive. And bipedal as the Cathar were, the Mandalorians didn't try to ride them into battle. I think. The Venator-class Star Destroyer was an attack cruiser designed by Quat Drive Yards, and most famously used by the Galactic Republic and Galactic Empire during the Clone Wars. The ship was over 3,700 feet long, not the longest capital ship out there, but one of the largest capable of atmospheric operations. The ship was designed for ship-to-ship combat and was armed with 8 dual DBY-827 heavy turbo-laser turrets, 2 medium dual turbo-laser cannons, 52-point defense dual laser cannons, 4 heavy proton torpedo launchers, 6 heavy tractor beam projectors, numerous deck guns, and another beam weapon. Despite its heavy armament, the Venator-class Star Destroyer was built to serve multiple roles, such as a starfighter carrier, military transport, or battleship escort. The ship was capable of carrying a complement of 192 Alpha 3 Nimbus-class VWing starfighters, 192 Eta 2 Actis-class light interceptors, 36 ARC 170 starfighters, and an assortment of other starfighters, walkers, shuttles, and vehicles of all sorts. The ship was fast as well, but because it wasn't the most self-sufficient ship, it depended heavily on supply lines during long-range campaigns. So as we said, the Venator-class Star Destroyer was a ship used by both the Galactic Republic and Galactic Empire during the era of the Clone Wars. But as time went on, the ship eventually became antiquated, and as newer classes of Star Destroyers became more popular, Venator-class ones ended up in the hands of all sorts of groups. And during the Galactic Civil War, the Mandalorians had one in their possession, but it ended up being destroyed during a battle with the Zan Consortium above Mandalore. First up is the Aggressor assault fighter. The only thing we really know about this ship from canon is that it was the type of ship used by the droid assassin bounty hunter IG-88, who worked in the service of Darth Vader. However, However, from Legends we learn that the Aggressor was a high-performance starship produced by Trilon Inc., a company known for producing starship hulls and basic control systems. The Aggressor was fast and maneuverable, and was somewhat of a hybrid starfighter/patrol ship. The starship got its agility from S-foils, movable wings that were mounted port and starboard on the ship. You can see on the front of the ship 2 mandibles which housed some of the ship's weaponry, such as twin ion and laser cannons, and the mandibles acted as magnetic docking clamps as well. The Trilon-produced ship had some parts from larger companies too, such as a quad drive yard Sol Mark 6 ion engine that gave the Aggressor extremely fast acceleration. So much so that Trilon engineers added safety limiters and inertial dampeners to the ship to prevent pilots from going unconscious during high-speed maneuvers. Such controls could be manually deactivated, but human pilots would have been unlikely to do so. The speed capabilities of the ship made it ideal for droid pilots like IG-88, who further modified the craft to truly push it to its limits, both in speed and defense. As far as Mandalorians go, they used Aggressor assault fighters during the Second Battle of Fondor, perhaps most notably Barton Jusek, a Jedi convert to the Mandalorian ways, was known for using the ship. Next up, we have the Alpha 3 Nimbus-class VWing starfighter, a starship produced by Quat Systems Engineering, the starship-making subsidiary of Quat Drive Yards, aka Space Honda. The VWing was a durable short-range starfighter, perhaps most notable for being deployed by the Galactic Republic during the late Clone Wars. The ship featured folding radiator wings, 2 ion engines, light twin laser cannons, and an optional concussion missile launcher. Kind of like the seat heater add-on in a Honda Civic. As it lacked a hyperdrive, the ship had to be transported by carriers in order to get to battle zones, and the ship also sacrificed a pressurized cockpit in favor of maximal speed and agility, which meant that pilots of organic makeup had to wear flight suits while aboard. As we hinted at, the VWing was a favored ship of the Galactic Republic and later the Galactic Empire, but as legends tell us, they eventually fell into other hands. The Rebel Alliance used them during the Galactic Civil War, and for the purposes of our video, the Mandalorians were seen using them during the Battle of Yavin, and have been known to use them on occasion. Next up is the Besso Leak, a ship the Mandalorians took much pride in as it was produced by Mandal Motors, a high-class starship-producing corporation founded by Mandalorian General Gustav Zenlov. Mandal Motors came to be known for the high-level design and power of their ships. They were the Bugatti of the galaxy far, far away. And part of the reason their ships were so coveted all over the galaxy was that their hulls were often made of Mandalorian iron, or Beskar, an extremely durable iron ore, the forging techniques of which Mandalorian metalsmiths kept secret, passing them very carefully only from generation to generation of metalsmiths, thus making Beskar extremely valuable and of rare strength. Anyway, the Besso Leak was a starfighter that Mandal Motors produced in time for use by the Mandalorians during the Second Galactic War. It's a little shortchanged to simply tell someone this versatile ship was a starfighter, as one would need to further specify the role it was being used in, as it could be employed in all sorts of roles. With 4 blasters, among other weapons, and stealth technology, the 15-meter-long ship could be used as anything from a bomber to a long-range hunter-killer. And listen, I know what you're thinking. What's meters? I'll be honest, I don't know either. I think it's some made-up European thing. Next up, the kom'rk-class starfighter, Kabr coming from the Mandalorian word for protector, was a wedge-shaped twin-engine snub fighter. The ship, another Mandal Motors product, was famous for being used by Fen Shissa during the Nagai Toph War. Fen Shissa was a human Mandalorian who joined the Mandalorian super commando unit known as the Mandalorian Protectors and fought for the Separatist Alliance during the Clone Wars. Under Shissa, Mandalorian Protectors were known to pilot the Kabr-class starfighter. The Davob-type starfighter, Davob coming from the Mandalorian word for carrying out and execution, was a fighter used by Mandalorians, notably during the Mandalorian Wars, to protect their capital ships. The ship came in at 8.8 meters long and had asymmetrical wings, one longer bent fin-shaped wing and another shorter one armed with a laser cannon. The bubble canopy within which the operator sat allowed its user full view of his surroundings. The original Mandalorian Crusaders saw the Davob starfighter as an object of pride, and were known for investing much time and effort into customizing and maintaining their ships, and thus many variations arose. By the time of the Neo-Crusaders, the ship was mass-produced and used throughout the Mandalorian forces, and at this point the ship became more uniform in look. This uniformity upset the older generation of Mandalorians who preferred variation and customization, looking down upon the boring youth who didn't mind all having the same ship. Next up, we have the Fang Fighter, also known as the Protectorate Fighter. The Fang, produced by Mandal Motors in partnership with Soros Corporation, was another ship used by the Mandalorian Protectors. The ship was designed for combat. It boasted a sleek design and movable S-foil wings that provided vectored thrust control, endowing it with superior speed and agility, and making it an excellent choice for executing head-on charges. The wings also housed the ship's twin forward-mounted laser cannons. The single-pilot Fang also mounted a retractable proton torpedo launcher on its underside. Interstellar-wise, the ship had a Class 2 hyperdrive and an onboard navigation computer. The ship was originally produced during the Imperial era, and the elite pilots of the Mandalorian protectors on the planet Concord Dawn preferred to use the Fang. Their use of the ship is how it came to be known as the Protectorate Starfighter. The M3A Psy Fighter, in contrast to the heavy ships we just mentioned, was a light interceptor produced by Mandal Motors. Named for Tatooine's Psych Lizard, this was a ship favored by criminal organizations including the Hutt Cartel, which is true for a lot of Mandal Motors ships. See, at first Mandal Motors, in struggling to grow as a company, wasn't allowed to operate within the Galactic Empire, but eventually was given approval when they installed an Imperial quote-unquote advisor on their board, which I'm sure resulted in many benefits for the Empire in the form of money and product. From there, Mandal Motors began to engage in dealing with illicit groups such as the Hutt Cartel and Zan Consortium. So back to the Psych, a ship that was notable for above all else its weapon mount, which could handle a variety of weapons, whether a laser cannon, ion cannons, concussion missile launcher, or proton torpedo launcher. In other words, the light armament of the Starfighter was made up for by the fact that a pilot could equip the ship with whatever weapon he needed for any given mission. Thus, with the ship, the user got a light, agile craft with offensive capabilities tailored as necessary. The design of the Psych was also the basis for the next ship on this list. The G1 M4C Dune Lizard fighter was developed by the Hutts and produced by Mandal Motors. The ship, named for Tatooine's Dune Lizards, was based on the M3A Psy Fighter in that it was agile and quick, but the Dune Lizard had stronger shields and a heavier payload than the ship that inspired it. The ship came standard with double medium laser cannons, but such armament could easily be upgraded in various ways. Two versions of the Dune Lizard were known to exist, a bulkier version and a slimmer version, both of which were popular among criminal outfits like pirates and smugglers due to the balance of power and agility the ship possessed. This ship isn't exactly a perfect fit for this list, as Mandalorians aren't the main users, but it is a Mandalorian manufactured ship and has been known to be used by them at times. Next, the Gladiator-class assault fighter was another starship used by Fen Shissa and his Mandalorian protectors. We don't know much about this ship, but it was an agile craft, and it came armed with 4 laser cannons and an ion cannon. Lacking any sort of navigation technology, Gladiators would travel in packs of 4 alongside a Pursuer-class enforcement ship which would slave them for hyperspace travel. The kom'rk class fighter, also known as the Gauntlet Starfighter, was a ship used by the Death Watch, a Mandalorian splinter group that opposed the pacifism of the new Mandalorians during the Clone Wars. The ship was equipped with a pair of forward and rear-mounted laser cannons for combat missions. However, the Death Watch used the fighter for transport and evacuation operations as well. The kom'rk class, which came in 2 models, a 68.1 meter long version and a 53.2 meter long version, had wings that could rotate around its body in flight, allowing for greater maneuverability. The Mandal Motors produced ship also featured 2 rear engines that were designed for rapid engine startup, thus another reason it could be used as an evacuation vessel. The M12L Kimogila Heavy Fighter was the heaviest snub fighter produced by Mandal Motors. This starfighter's armament included 2 heavy laser cannons, a concussion missile launcher with 12 concussion missiles, and a proton torpedo launcher. Given its mix of weaponry, the M12L could be used as either a fighter or a bomber. Despite its relative lack of speed and agility, the offensive versatility of the ship made it a popular vessel among criminal organizations, most notably the Hutt Cartel. I assume by now you're starting to take the hint that Mandal Motors didn't really care who their buyers were as long as they were getting paid. Space capitalism. Anyway, among Mandalorians, the M12L was known for being used by the Accuyor during the Mandalorian-Ithulin War in 200 BBY. The Accuyor was a group of Mandalorians who came together after the rise of the new Mandalorian government to support a continuation of the old Mandalorian warrior ways. The M22T Crate gunship was another Mandal Motor ship commissioned by the Hutts and was the biggest combat ship that Mandal Motors produced. It was a slow ship, topping out at only 800 km per hour, but was heavily armed and armored. It had 2 heavy laser cannons, 3 medium ion cannons, and a concussion missile launcher with 16 concussion missiles. As hinted at already, this ship was most often seen in the fat, slimy hands of the Hutts. Next, the Star Viper class attack platform was a heavy starfighter produced by Mandal Motors that was based on a prototype of the ship they made for the Falian Prince Zizor during the era of the Galactic Civil War. The Star Viper class attack platform featured twin heavy laser cannons and 2 proton torpedo launchers with 3 warheads each. The ship could also release buzz droids that were capable of damaging nearby aircraft, which made the ship a favorite of the Zan Consortium, which used them to deploy swarms of sabotage droids they obtained from the black market. The Mandalorians themselves used this ship during the Galactic Civil War. Then the Viper Mk2 was a variant of the Viper class attack platform. Instead of heavy laser cannons and a proton torpedo launcher, it had 4 light laser cannons, 2 light ion cannons, and also boasted heavier shielding than its predecessor. Finally, the Veerhawk fighter bomber is a ship we know little about, as it has only appeared in the novel Fate of the Jedi Vortex. What we do know is that the Veerhawk was a starfighter used by the Mandalorian protectors in 44 ABY during their siege of the New Jedi Temple. Let's start with the Accuyor class shuttle, also known as the Mandalorian shuttle. I don't actually know if the J should have been silent there. If you know, let me know in the comments below, but I feel like it's cooler, the silent J. Silent letters are always cooler. The Accuyor class shuttle was a shuttle. Didn't see that one coming, did you? That was produced by Mandal Motors and used by the new Mandalorians during the Clone Wars. The Accuyor shuttle didn't have any hyperdrive because it was mostly used just to transport passengers within close proximity of Mandalore, such as its moon Concordia. That said, the 18-meter long shuttle could reach speeds of up to 900 kilometers per hour. Hold on for 1 second, please. Oh, hey Lisa, quick question. Who put that metric crap in the script? Uh-huh. And what do we do to people who misbehave and don't follow the rules? That's right, we execute them. And what else? We kill 3 generations of their family. So please, would you get that done for me? Thank you. Oh, and Lisa, don't let it happen again! Sorry, as you can see, the ship also had wings that could change position in order to act as landing gear. Of course, as the new Mandalorians were pacifists, so were their ships, meaning the Accuyor class had no armament, as the ship was designed for quote-unquote peaceful transportations. In the case that it was fired upon, it would fire back not with stupid laser beams, but with love beams, in the hopes of making the galaxy a better place. The G-type light shuttle was a small transport ship produced by Horst Kessel Drive Inc. and played a major role for the Sith in ferrying small groups back and forth between planets and capital ships during the Jedi Civil War and Sith Civil War. One reason the ship was so popular is that it had advanced pilot programming, meaning that it could be operated by less experienced pilots. There was also an escape configuration of the ship that allowed room for only 1 person, as it came with more equipment dedicated to increasing the occupant's survivability. The escape configuration also had stronger shielding and a hyperdrive. As far as Mandalorians go, the Neo-Crusaders, an order of Mandalorians that fought the Mandalorian Wars against the Galactic Republic thousands of years before the rise of the Empire, were known to use this ship. The Mandalorian dungeon ship was a prison warship built by the Mandalorians and used by the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders during the Mandalorian Wars to transport prisoners. We don't know much about this ship, but it proved to be so durable that its design was the basis for 2 ships to come thousands of years later. The first of these ships was the Lictor-class dungeon ship, also known as the Imperial Dungeon Ship. The Lictor class was a mobile prison warship produced by Mandal Motors. The Empire would use the 2,500-foot-long ship's universal energy cages and holding cells to transport thousands of Force-sensitive prisoners during the Great Jedi Purge. The sight of the Lictor class was intimidating to the Jedi, who knew of the ship's sparring chambers in which Sith acolytes would be allowed to practice on captive Jedi. Legend has it, no captive to ever enter one of these ships was ever seen alive again. The Mandalorians themselves used the ship during the Ujam Vong War in the late 20s ABY. Then, Rendili Stardrive, another starship manufacturing company, would go on to produce the Kiltarin-class dungeon ship, a scaled-down version of the Lictor-class dungeon ship, still based on the original Mandalorian design. This just under 500-foot-long ship could carry 1,250 prisoners and had only 5 quad turbo laser batteries, whereas the Lictor class had 10, and had only a single tractor beam projector, where its bigger sibling had 2. The Mandalorian gunship was a ship used by the Death Watch during the Clone Wars. The Death Watch was a Mandalorian splinter group that arose in support of a return to the savage and violent ways of the ancient Mandalorians and greatly opposed the pacifist ideals of the new Mandalorians, and it's honestly hard to explain what the hell they are and why the hell they arose, because canon and legends is a complete cluster truck. Anyway, we really don't know anything about this ship. You're gonna have to use your imagination. We think the ship existed because the Star Wars databank seems to imply a few times that it appeared during the Clone Wars, but because it provides no information about it and no picture, we cannot determine which ship it is or if it actually did exist. It might not have. Next, the Neo-Crusader Q Carrier was a carrier ship used as a troop dropship by the Neo-Crusaders during the Mandalorian Wars. This is another ancient ship that we know almost nothing about, but once again, it was the predecessor to an even greater ship that would come later. The later ship, of course, was the Meteor-class Q Carrier, a Mandal Motors-produced ship that was used by the true Mandalorians and the Mandalorian Protectors. True Mandalorians were a group of Mandalorian supercommandos who opposed the Death Watch. Don't get me wrong, the true Mandalorians loved violence and bloodshed and murder and all that other fun stuff. They just preferred to do such things in an honorable way, rather than eat the flesh of their enemies and kill cute cuddly animals as the Death Watch did. The Mandalorian Protectors, on the other hand, were elite warriors who served as the ruler of Mandalore's royal guard and maintained balance in the warrior culture. Both of these groups employed the Q Carrier as a dropship, using it to transport troops to the battlefield from carriers in space. Actually, given its exclusive use by the Mandalorians, it came to be called the Mandalorian dropship, and in honor of their history, the look of the ship was made to resemble the face of a Tong, the Mandalorians' ancient ancestors. The Q Carrier was also well armored with heavy hull plating and was armed with twin blaster cannons. Transport-wise, the ship was capable of very fast landings thanks to its landing gear, which could absorb the shock of high-speed impacts. When production of Mandal Motors ships was disrupted by the Mandalorian Civil War, the Q Carrier had to be replaced by the Amphibious Interstellar Assault Transport, a gunship designed by Quad Drive Yards. The AIAT was then used by the Mandalorians as their go-to troop transport in the lead-up to the Clone Wars. The 103-foot-long ship could use its pair of oversized sublight engines to carry up to 50 troops or an assortment of troops, prisoners, vehicles, and other cargo. The AIAT was armed with laser turrets and concussion missiles and could land on water. The Pursuer-class enforcement ship was a heavy patrol craft produced by Mandal Motors. The 98-foot ship featured twin blaster cannons, an ion cannon turret, and a proton torpedo launcher, which isn't often mounted on ships of this size. The Pursuer was also equipped with military-grade shield generators. Originally, the ship was used by the Mandalorian Protectors during the Clone Wars. But once the Empire forced Mandal Motors to install Imperial advisors on their board, the ship magically became available to Imperial forces throughout the galaxy. Boba Fett himself used a modified Pursuer called Slave 2, but it was eventually stolen. During the Yuuzhan Vong War, the Mandalorian Protectors used the ship, usually with a slaved Gladiator-class assault fighter, to liberate worlds. The Shadler-type troop ship was the name for a series of military personnel carriers used by the Mandalorian Crusaders and Neo-Crusaders during the Great Sith War and Mandalorian Wars to land troops on the surface of planets for the purpose of beginning an assault. When landing, the ship's legs would extend to support the weight of the ship. The Shadlar was armed with medium turbo lasers, ion cannons, and concussion missiles. The Shadlar had an arthropodous or insect-like appearance, and thus it's no surprise that it was based on a basilisk in design. It certainly bore some similarities to the basilisk war droid, though later versions of the ship tended to look less insect-like. The Stathis-class freighter was a starship produced by Mandal Motors. There's not much to say about this ship as it was an experimental ship with only 9 ever built. The ship really didn't have anything special about its appearance and looked like many other freighters. The ship was named for the Stathis, a sleek venomous reptile native to the Mandalore system that was known for seeming harmless in appearance in order to hide its deadly capabilities. The 95-foot-long ship was armed with a quad laser cannon and a proton torpedo launcher, and was also well armored and could stand up to heavy fire from enemy ships. Thus, despite being a freighter, the Stathis could challenge many starfighters, including TIE fighters. One of the 9 ships produced, known as the Tyonan Ranger, was used by Twi'lek Bib Fortuna to smuggle spice for Jabba the Hutt. Eventually, the ring was taken down and the ship was seized. Finally, the Trakad-class transport, another ship that we don't have any images of, was a starship produced by Mandal Motors in 40 ABY and used by the Mandalorian Protectors in complement with the Besso Leak, a Mandalorian starfighter that saw much action during the Second Galactic Civil War. The Trakad meaning Star Saber in Mandoa, was a flying tank. It was slow and heavily armored and was used for assault as well as for troop insertion and extraction. The ship was armed with 6 cannon turrets and rotating modular weapons platforms. The ship also had no blind spots as its weapons fired in arcs that overlapped each other. The Trakad was very low tech, which meant it could function for a time without power. Mandalorians would often use this advantage to hide undetected among space debris, waiting for the perfect opportunity to launch a surprise attack. Okay, well that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're excited for some Mandalorian and other Star Wars coverage on this channel. If you like the video, please do give it a thumbs up, comment down below. Remember to hit that subscribe button and that notification bell. For now, my name is American Ben, and I'll catch you next time. Generation Films, peace.